Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our speakers and attendees from different time zones today. And welcome to the Design Thinking webinar. My name is Dana Batlouni, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. My interest in human-centered design and design thinking and its potential stems from my PhD and work in collaborative design. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion, hoping that through this webinar, we will be able to share with you this interest and convey the wide range of potential applications of design thinking and its impact. We are really excited to be hosting this talk today, where we will be discussing many interesting areas pertaining to design thinking. I want to thank our guest speakers for generously giving us their time to share their invaluable experience in design thinking and to tell us more about the relevance of design thinking in reshaping different industries, ranging from products and services, all the way to reimagining experiences and supporting research communities. I want to also thank all the attendees for taking the time to join us today and everyone who helped in organizing this webinar. My colleague, Mr. Rawad Dalal, is supporting us during this talk today, and he will also be moderating the audience Q&A session. So the focus of our talk today is design thinking. Broadly, design thinking is also known as human-centered design. It's a creative problem-solving process using designerly tools and research methods. Design thinking is focused around human needs, aiming to deliver solutions that are first desirable for the beneficiaries, that are also technologically feasible and economically viable. The core elements of design thinking are empathy with the beneficiaries or users in order to understand their behavior and consequently meet their needs with relevant solutions or outputs. Interdisciplinary collaboration, bringing in a multitude of perspectives and converging efforts to deliver relevant solutions, and the experiential and largely iterative nature of this learning process based on testing, feedback, and improvement. A quick note to the audience, please, you can share your questions with us in the chat box anytime throughout this webinar. If you know who you want to address your questions to, please start with the name of the guest speaker followed by your question. I would first like to start by giving the floor to Dr. Nael Alami, Provost of the Modern University for Business and Science. Dr. Alami is passionate about design thinking and its potential in reshaping students' learning experience and the teaching process. He is currently
I think all of us just lost Dana for a while. Dana, you're back.
Yep.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Okay, I don't know where you lost me.
The last sentence, so you can.
Okay, yeah, Dr. Alami, as I said, he's very passionate about the design thinking and the ways in which we can incorporate it in the teaching experience and also learning experience in MUBS. And I'd like to give him the floor to share with us his note.
Thank you, Dr. Dana. I appreciate it. Thanks for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. Good morning to those of you joining us from the States and the Americas. Good afternoon, joining us from Europe, and good evening to all those joining from the Middle East and all the way to Pakistan. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you. As a Stanford alumnus, I have to be passionate about design thinking and human-centered design. I'm very happy that I'm joined by a wonderful panel today to hear more about the advancements and the utility of design thinking in building a better future. So I believe the webinar today specifically is a reflection of what we strive to be at MUBS as an institution of higher learning that's at the forefront of innovation, striving to help our community navigate the challenges of the world using the tools, the knowledge, the principles that enable our students and our community to find the solutions to complex challenges that face the world today to build a more prosperous future. Needless to say, we are currently in the midst of one of these challenges as manifested by the global pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, which is only one of many such challenges on different levels. And today we will be hearing about some of these challenges. We will be hearing about the use of human-centered design in space exploration, in education, in journalism, in trying to bridge the gender gap, and other challenges come to mind, like climate change, obesity, which is a public health challenge. So design thinking it plays an integral role in finding human-centered solutions to these complex problems, unleashing innovation and creativity within different disciplines, which is really something that we are always seeking. So in the midst of all this, our university finds itself compelled, as any higher education institution should, to contribute to finding solutions to these problems and equipping the leaders of the future with the tools necessary to find solutions to the problems that face them, as knowledge creation, more than just knowledge dissemination, is the raison d'etre of any higher education institution. The interdisciplinarity, the disruptive nature, the collaborative nature, the bias towards action that differentiates design thinking, and the empathy that distinguishes design thinking are all principles that we are very passionate about. So we, on our part at MUBS, we have recognized the importance of design thinking years ago by integrating human-centered design into our curricula. Years ago, one of our panelists here has offered our students the opportunity to join one of the most popular classes in Stanford, Designing Your Life, which was taught by John at the time. We also followed that by the integration of design thinking into a number of our courses, which was an effort led by Mr. Rawad Dalal, who is one of the moderators and organizers of this webinar today, supported by the chair of the design department, Ms. Rima Ammar. And we are currently in the process of establishing an interdisciplinary hub with the help and the contribution of some of our panelists today. The hub, we hope, will be at the heart of interdisciplinarity, offering students, staff, industry leaders, and scholars the opportunity to train, explore, to prototype, and to innovate together under the same roof, utilizing the tools and the principles of design thinking. MUBS, therefore, is committed today more than ever to our nation, to face the problems and challenges facing our nation and our world, to offer our students, staff, and community members the tools they need and the skills necessary to find a path forward to a more prosperous, peaceful, and human-centered future. And we believe that design thinking will be one of the most important tools at their disposal to achieve a better future. And I hope that our webinar today will be an inspiration to the faculty members, to the students, and other community leaders with us today to endorse our endeavor to do so. Thank you, Dr. Dana. Thank you to the panelists, and I look forward to hearing the discussions that we will have today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nael, for this very inspiring introduction. And at first, I'd just like to note that we're in Lebanon and the internet connection can be sometimes not really helpful.
Dr. Dana, I think we're losing you a little.
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you fine now.
Okay. I'm sorry about this. You know, the internet and it can be sometimes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Should we introduce our first panelist?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Right. So this brings us to our next part. Excuse me if the internet is a little bit tricky these days. So we're in Lebanon, unfortunately. Our guest speakers. We're going to start with John Armstrong.
Well, I just lost Dana, but I'll just come off mute and say thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and honored to be on the panel with all of you. So thanks everyone who's here. Thanks for the introduction, which I think is probably ongoing.
Yeah, I think my colleague is having like a problem. So until she connects, we're gonna continue with this. So introducing our first guest speaker, John. He's a lecturer and fellow in the Stanford Design Program, and is a meditation guide at Stanford. John teaches classes and develops programs to help students get the most out of college, work, and life. Courses include designing your life, designing your Stanford, and designing the professional. John has also led courses at universities in the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia, consulted with the Fortune 500 clients, and taught meditation and wellness in Title I schools. So thank you so much for joining us in this event. So John, our first question to you. Students shift from high school to higher education is ultimately a life-changing experience. Could you please describe to us how design thinking shaped this personal journey through the course of Design Thinking Your Life?
Sure, thanks for the question, and thanks again for having me. So I think before kind of getting into that, wanted to share a little quick context on what this course is and the kind of angle that we take. So as Dana mentioned at the start of the talk, human-centered design is applied across all of these different ways. And in this particular course, Design Your Life, as well as some other associated courses, we think instead of in terms of designing a service or a product, we think how might we use the innovation principles of design to the wicked problem of our lives and our careers. So how might we design our own lives and careers? And that also, if we think about the types of problems that design is really great for, wicked problems, problems that are constantly changing, in which the parameters are unclear, our lives and our careers and our education are very much within those categories. And I'll mention too, as Dennis said, there's this sweet spot of feasibility, viability, desirability, and in some way we might apply that to ourselves as well. So it's a different angle on this process, this approach, I might say. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can continue, go ahead.
Cool. So a couple quick things in terms of the progression or the transitions into or out of college. A few things or a few ways in which we use this process. So if we think of the phases or pieces of design thinking, we might think in this context of empathy as being for self and others, learning through conversation, through dialogue, through interaction, defining problems, which of course is essential for good problem solving, and I think nowhere more so than in our lives. Ideating multiple possible paths that we could take, whether educationally, personally, professionally, using multiple options in decision making to make better decisions we're happier with. And excuse me, how might we use this concept of prototyping from design and apply it to our lives? How might we learn through experience? How might we gather data by doing and do so before we make a big investment? So these are some of the ways that we use this in the context of classes educationally, in this course, Design Your Life, and others that I teach. And I think more directly to the question, last thing I would note is that I've been struck, whether at MUBS or at the pleasure, the privilege of joining Dr. Khalek in Pakistan as well, and I've been struck how relevant this type of problem solving is across cultures. And so that's been one of the joys that I've gotten to experience, I think, in the last several years is how relevant this can be, while of course recognizing difference in students or participants, but that as a very flexible problem solving approach, design thinking is remarkably relevant across different contexts.
Thank you, John. Sorry for the technical issue with my internet. I'm going to go ahead. Sorry, I'm going to go back and continue introducing our other guest speakers, just so our audience and we all know who's with us today and what are the different topics that we're going to cover. Sorry for the glitch. Aside from John, we have Dr. Clara Watkins. Dr. Clara is a lecturer at Cardiff School of Art and Design, and she works closely with Cardiff School of Medicine. Her research aims to understand the impact of social, economic, and political elements on the use of medical products in low-resource environments. A key element of her research involves the creation of low-cost and sustainable medical products that enable universal access to life-saving medical equipment. Bethan Gordon, Deputy Dean of Cardiff School of Art and Design. As part of her role at the school, Bethan applies human-centered design tools and methods to develop the student and also staff experiences and to influence a shift on more of an institutional level. Bethan's PhD and research focus on contextual simulation and have informed guidelines required in user testing scenarios. Bethan has also recently led a Welsh government project concerning primary and secondary school teachers to implement a radical new curriculum in all of its schools, using design thinking as tools and methods to inform this process and involve the teachers in this process as well. Angeliki Kapoglu is part of the strategy and innovation team at the Directorate of Human Spaceflight and Robotic Exploration at the European Space Agency. Angeliki has been involved with the space sector for more than 10 years. Her research is focused on the strategic planning and international partnerships for future lunar exploration missions, the emerging space economy, and European Space Agency's new space resources strategy. Dr. Anzar Khalek holds a PhD in nanophysics from Sorbonne University and is currently serving as the Associate Dean at Habib University, a preeminent liberal arts university in Karachi, Pakistan. He is currently looking after Playground, which is a center for transdisciplinary design and innovation at Habib University. Dr. Anzar is passionate about the future of teaching and learning and is an avid user of design thinking frameworks to create more design. Ana Santos, she's going to join us a little bit later due to some personal commitments. Yeah. In media. She worked across Latin America. Sorry. And then use of
Okay, I think we have lost Dana again. Sorry for the inconvenience that's happening back in Lebanon. So John, we were like talking about the transition related to the high school, And my second question for you would be, what do you think are the similarities and the differences that stand out most to you through your experience in teaching the Design Your Life course in various contexts across the globe?
Thanks. And sorry, I'm embarrassed now. I thought I was supposed to go on for a while with the first question.
Yeah. We're sorry for that. No worries.
All the other attendees, and also I'm not sure if we noted that the reason we're coming to me first is that I'm actually going to Singapore right after this in about 30 minutes, and so need to get in when I can here. So my apologies for dominating any of your time.
You can go ahead.
So I guess just following, I mentioned a bit about relevance across contexts and just how I've seen that, and to follow up on that just briefly a little more. One of the things that we think about in our classes is what narratives or what stories do students or participants bring with them, and how might we work together to illuminate some of those. And I mentioned that across context, the relevance and applicability of design has been really striking to me. I would also say actually that at least in a college context, the similarity or universality of some of these narratives that, for instance, we see a lot of Stanford students bringing with them has also been kind of surprising to me. So cultural narratives around success in academics or careers, how that relates to family or parents, this idea of college is the best years of your life and implications of that, depending on context, maybe more so, and perhaps with less universal relevance, the idea of following a passion or finding a passion, definitely a big one in the United States, perhaps less so in many other countries where I've worked. Being the best version of yourself, also some hit or miss across different contexts. So what I find particularly interesting personally, but also as it starts a dialogue, is to bring up this idea of different narratives and what are the narratives that we as learners are bringing with us into our educational context. So it's been quite interesting across different universities or cultures where I've had the privilege of working.
Interesting. I think Dana, you can continue.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm really sorry about this. I turned off my camera, so hopefully that will help a little bit. I didn't hear Rawad's question, but I was wondering, John, if you could share with us, we are witnessing changes in the learning needs today. I'd like to know more about what you think are these changes, and are we talking more about the industry needs and demands, or more of the way knowledge is transferred and skills are internalized? And how does design thinking help with that? I'm sorry, I just want to highlight that John, due to urgent personal commitments, he might not be able to stay for the whole length of the webinar. So I just wanted to benefit from his time with us to ask him another question.
Thanks. And yeah, again, apologies. In addition to the Singapore thing, the urgent personal commitment is that actually I have a baby due tomorrow, which might come today. So I was like, Dr. Alami, I can come, but like maybe I won't be able to come.
No problem. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making it.
Yeah, my pleasure, really. So to your question about the educational context, and of course, as we've gotten used to over the last year, there's a dog, and I see the neighbor is starting to get ready to mow the lawn, so I'm a little worried. I'm glad I'm getting a couple words in now. One thing that I will say, which I think it's, at least in a U.S. context, almost cliche at this point, but I really genuinely think it's true, is that because of the rapid pace of changing technology, how quickly technology is changing, if we or our students just learn specific skills within a particular technological context and really focus narrowly, then it's quite likely actually that will be irrelevant before too long. And so again, in the context of design, thinking about a process and approach, a set of mindsets, a set of skills and abilities, which then have wider relevance and applicability across different technologies, across changing circumstances, educationally or globally. So I'll close for now on that. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you, John. I think I would like to talk a little bit more about design thinking in education. With a question to Dr. Anzar Khalid. Personally, as someone who is part of a developing nation that is trying to incorporate such conceptual models, I'm particularly interested in your perspective about this process in relation to human-centered design and design thinking. I'd like to know also your opinion about the changes in the learning needs from an industry needs perspective, but also how we transfer skills and knowledge these days. But also I want to learn from your experience what actual differences could help or inhibit the adoption of such tools in education, but also in industries.
Right, thanks, Dana. So I'll give a brief introduction to, again, the setup, the context within which I'm in. So I'm from Habib University, based in Karachi, Pakistan. Karachi is one of the largest cities in the world. If I'm not wrong, third or fourth largest city in the world, with a population exceeding 20 million. And it's interesting that when we look at cities of such size and we try to understand the problems, you see that there are no parallels which are in similar contexts within which you can get inspiration from. And to understand problems of cities like this or contexts like this, you cannot really look towards a developed country and understand what's happening there. And I think that has been a fallacy that, or a fallacious approach that people have adopted for a very long time, that they look for things that have worked in a completely different context and try to apply them within their own regions without understanding the consequences. And we have faced this in Pakistan a lot. So you run into a problem of a developing country, which is very different from a developed country. But you bring in the experts from the West, and they come in, and from their own perspectives, they try to implement solutions, and they have always failed. So I would use the word always, because this is the story of our country. And I think it's very important for us to understand why these failures keep on happening. A larger reason of this failure of making any impact is also a large failure of education, which basically disconnects us from any reality. So if you look at any educational experience that we deliver globally, in fact, it's not just Pakistan, it's everywhere. It's not very contextually grounded. It doesn't really connect us to who we are. In certain majors, in certain disciplines, you might get this exposure, but this is something that seems to be lost on us, that the purpose of education should also be, to place us where we are, and this time and this history is extremely important for us, and understand the consequences of what's happening around us. And I think this has been extremely important for us. So the university which I belong to has a very, very strong focus on understanding the problems that arise in modern day and age, and especially placing ourselves within our own history, within our own context, so that we can relate to the problems that we see around ourselves, instead of getting fascinated by problems which are not really connected to us and we can't do much about them. So this is something that John was also hinting towards, that with the rapid pace of technology, the skills that you require today might become completely irrelevant tomorrow. There's another thing attached to it. Because of the rapid change in technology, the learning experiences have dramatically changed. I didn't go to college not so long ago. I finished my undergrad in 2007. But it was a while ago, well, still in the 21st century. The learning paradigms were very different. I didn't have access to great internet. There was no Coursera, no Udemy. YouTube didn't offer educational videos. In order to understand fundamentals of physics, my only choice was my professor and the library where I could go to. And my understanding of the problems was also coming in from the same context. Students are not exposed to the same experience anymore. The instructor in the class is not just a creator, is a curator as well. And there are more facilitators towards learning as well. Unfortunately, the learning paradigms in the universities haven't changed. And it's because of the rewarding infrastructure that's created, which is heavily tilted towards producing a certain kind of scholarship that does not heavily reward, in all cases, innovations in these learning experiences. So out of personal brilliance or interest, or through certain departments, this might be happening, but it's not integrated in the DNAs of the university. And we actually faced that during the COVID-19, that lots of problems that we have within our own learning paradigms became completely obvious. It's interesting that higher education inspires major change, but it's one of those industries that resists the change itself a lot. So we look a lot more like we were 100 years ago, and the changes have been small. So within that context, I think it's very important for us to understand the problems through a broader lens. So this is what human-centered design brings to the plate. It allows you to see the problem from a much larger perspective. We are tired of people driving cars, making roads, because they don't then design roads for motorbikes and rickshaws in our context, or public transportation. And so we keep on seeing this major disconnect, even in services. And essentially that's, so the industries are also changing. They have figured out this major opportunity as well. For example, the banking sector in Pakistan, I think they're doing absolutely terrible in terms of outreach. I don't know the exact number, but it's in the low 20%, I guess, in terms of access to people who have bank accounts. And here's an opportunity to reach out, but the understanding of the market is so poor that they don't really know how to connect with those. So just coming out with random services which sound interesting to people who are working in the bank have not worked for the past 2-3 decades. And now they're coming to the party. They're coming up with their own human-centered labs. They're creating their own design experiences. They're trying to understand the customer from the lens of the user itself, rather than just focusing on what smart people believed that they can do. And I think that's a major change that we need. So industries actually, for that particular reason, are getting exposed to different products that they can bring into the market that they haven't been able to bring before. And this change has also somewhat, in fact, not somewhat, very clearly started a revolution, so sort of an entrepreneurial revolution in Pakistan as well, where you see a lot of people understanding these problems and using, let's say, design research, design thinking as foundational experiences for them to explore problems and then design around it, while the big companies are still stuck with their own legacies. So this is definitely going to have a transformative experience. You can give it any name. Today it's design thinking, tomorrow it can be something else, but empathy is the most important part of that, or seeing problems from the lens of the user is, I think, the most critical. At Habib, we do the same for teaching. So we do student-centered design. So instead of designing around content only, which have been a focus of higher education for a very, very long time, how do you design around students as well as participants in this learning journey? Sorry, I'll stop here. Dana.
No, that's great to hear. I think you touched on many points that I want to come back to later, especially in regards to how to incorporate these skills, research and empathy, which overlap, of course, within the learning experience for students, and how to prepare students for more research. I think this was lacking a lot and still is. Teaching or giving students this the skill of conducting research and empathizing. So I want to get back to this, but first, to touch on your last point on how to design students' experiences, I wanted to ask Bethan a question from your experience within the School of Art and Design, and also your involvement in the Welsh Government project to implement this radical new curriculum in all its schools, and also allow the teachers to be part of this change using these design thinking tools. Could you explain to us more how design thinking could influence both the curricula and the learning experience, and how could academics and teachers incorporate such frameworks to improve their students' experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks ever so much for having me. It's great to be able to talk about the Welsh Government project as well, because actually design thinking, I'm a human-centered designer. It comes naturally. I apply it in everything that I do. But it's really interesting when you pause for a moment to reflect on what are those key attributes that others can benefit from. And the Welsh Government project, I'll give a bit of context. So in Wales, we're a relatively small country of about 4 million people, and the government decided that they were going to move their entire curriculum from age 4 to 18. They were going to change the entire curriculum, but they were changing it from a curriculum that told teachers what needed to be taught and how to teach it, to a curriculum that actually they gave teachers agency. You now can look at the context of your school and your learners, and you can decide on the curriculum. Now that change is a huge fundamental change. And it's been 30 years, you know, of ingrained national curriculum to this new curriculum. So I was really fortunate, and by accident, I led this project by accident because they needed somebody from a school of art and design. So great, yeah, I'll be involved in this project. And it was by accident because in education, they're notorious in school education in the UK. They're quite notorious for when they look at their innovation and inspiration, they look within education. So it's quite limited actually, because they're actually their ideas, there's some excellent examples, but if you keep looking in, your inspiration, you know, very quickly you can run out of ideas and you're repeating the same thing. So there's a couple of agendas that we needed to address in this, and design thinking was the perfect tool to actually offer up a process that enabled teachers to develop curriculum, packages of learning. And actually what we realized very quickly, that when you go from a culture of being told very much what needs to happen to you have complete autonomy, you lose confidence. And actually they didn't know how to do it. So this is the project I'm working on is a great example of how you take the key attributes of human-centered design and you apply it in a different area, which in essence is exactly what design thinking was intended for. So what we found was that actually we needed to really help the teachers understand how they gain insights and inspiration and how you make informed decision making, and actually how do you then generate a multitude of ideas and make sure you're not predetermining the outcome and predetermine it on behalf of the learners. So what's been really nice in the project is we've not only used design thinking to actually develop teachers and their way of thinking. Welsh Government recognised it as its own independent theory that actually our learners from the age of 4 now should be taught or use, because actually it's the one process that actually applies across lots of different subjects. You can apply it to everything, can't you? I've got 2 children and I'm often applying design thinking to their life and helping them. You know, I'm sat there going, right, you've got to research, you've got to be inspired. Okay, now you've got to, like, you know, feed this in. Now you've got to test your ideas. And then I think, no, hang on, they're 8 and 11. I have to remind myself. So in essence, I think the project, you know, the project that I've been working on is quite heartwarming. You know, I work quite a lot in the school. You asked me about the school before I digress. You know, in the university that I work in, I'm a deputy dean, and actually we put the students at the centre of our processes. We put the students, you know, they are our participants and one of our stakeholders. And actually it is about empathy and it is about engaging all staff in the process. And we actually make sure, so I'm influencing another project at the minute, and it would have been so easy just to look at other universities and how they do it. Actually, let's look at other sectors, let's look at other professional big organizations, and let's learn from them and pull it in. So actually it's that spine of the design process that we're just reapplying and reapplying so we can make informed and confident decisions. And that's the thing, actually, it's about confidence. It's about being able to take a risk safely. Well, design thinking is the enabler that supports you to do that.
Yes, thank you so much, Bethan. I think it was a very interesting point, the fact that a lot of times in a lot of contexts, we copy things, we adopt things and see how we can find a solution somewhere else rather than creating the solution from the actual core problem. And on that point, like you mentioned, you know, using other fields, you know, knowledge or experiences from other fields to actually find solutions. I have a question. I think maybe John as well could have an input on that, and Dr. Anzar, from your experience, what kind of resistance do you see or do you face, you know, from a playground, or also John, from you incorporating different fields within education, and Bethan, kind of resistance from different fields into working together or into changing the way things are done? I mean, you know, the notion, if it's working, why fix it? I mean, a lot of times it's not working, but what kind of resistance have you faced or you see on daily basis in this context?
I mean, if I go quickly, briefly, I think at the minute we're at a really interesting moment, and I'm experiencing not a lot of resistance at institutional level. Our pro-vice chancellors are recognizing design thinking and using that terminology and that process to try and influence change. So that's really heartwarming. When I worked on the Welsh Government project, the government don't necessarily, attributes of the government don't necessarily get it, but the team, they took hold of those principles, and actually we've influenced completely different schools with, you know, so it's been very promising. Although I did have a comment in one group which was, oh yes, design thinking, I've heard of that, and that was it. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because that means I wonder if actually they're either not educated enough in it to truly understand its benefits, or in the school, I sometimes, rather than call it design thinking, I call it creative thinking, because I also work with a lot of artists who get resistance to the word design. So I call it the creative thinking process. There you go, I'll hand over to your other thing.
No, thank you so much, Beth. And John, if you would like to give us your point of view on this area.
Sure. Personally, thankfully, I haven't had to navigate too much around sort of politics or resistance. But two things that come to mind, both in my specific context, but I think also more broadly. One is something that Anzar mentioned earlier, which is that universities currently and also historically the incentive structure is very much based around a certain type of knowledge creation and certain type of research. And so given that that's the incentive structure, given that that's been the history of it, this new type of thinking and really new type of education can be viewed with some skepticism. And I think that's fair. I think it's valid and important really to view new ideas with a little bit of skepticism, you know, not just wholesale accept anything that's in vogue at the moment. So that's one thing, is just, you know, professors, researchers, et cetera, being like, okay, well, what is this? And having a bit of skepticism to it. In addition to that, I guess the second thing would be that as an approach and as a problem-solving process, for lack of a better word, design thinking is very fluid, and like the problems it seeks to solve or address is in some ways changing, in some ways sometimes can feel nebulous. And I think a lot of people, and I would say myself included, like I'm like, what is step one? What is step two? What is step three? Like, what is the rubric or the clearly defined process that I can apply and then just work through? And the reality is that difficult problems don't work and aren't solved in that way. But as an approach, design thinking then, I think, can be perceived sometimes as like wishy-washy because we're pulling from different places at different times.
Thank you, John. Dr. Anzar, I don't know if you have, you wanted to say something about this, the resistance and putting people together and telling them to work together under one umbrella.
Yeah, it feels very counterintuitive to a lot of other people. So let's say not so long ago, I was actually working with a group of industry folks, and they were in a room and the senior executives came in and they said, you're telling me that me and my subordinates, both our experiences matter equally, or both our inputs are equally important. And they couldn't understand that. And it happens. I was also giving a training to some professors in another university where they got pretty upset. The PhD folks said that I have a PhD and you're telling me that a student can come into this workshop and their point of view is equally relevant. Well, if they know everything, what are we doing here? They can have their own classes together. So when I told them that students can be participants in learning, they started making fun of me. And like, but who's going to cover chapter 16 of this book if we start designing around them? How do students know anything about their own learning? It's a very interesting insight. And I think there's, if you haven't, especially with the folks here as well, there's a fantastic story of Riverside School in India. And it's a case study that should be watched. It's a fantastic story of a mother who got really upset with how education was happening, ended up creating a completely new school inspired by student experiences, and in this case, kids in the kindergarten. And it's now adopted in more than 30 plus countries. She started in 2001. I think the woman is also the founder for Design for Change. But that's what it is. This is the kind of resistance we face because the ideas are very counterintuitive. I mean, if you go deeper into the process, the divergent convergent processes where you say quality doesn't matter, put quantity, because quality is such a subjective word that you can never know what quality means. And people start like, what do you mean? I mean, I have certain degrees and I can only produce quality arguments. And what do you mean produce quantity and not quality? Because we have always been taught otherwise, that it's quality that matters. And then quality is such, again, a subjective term. So these ideas sound very counterintuitive to people. And another thing that comes around is the skepticism towards the whole term, that it's repackaging of some other experiences. Well, it is. No one is saying that it is not. But what's important is understanding the very foundational principles of inclusivity, of understanding problem from a broader lens. We don't care what name you give to it. And that's the skepticism that you usually face around these problems here.
Thank you, Dr. Anzar. I'm going to get back to this point that you spoke about, quality versus quantity and how that affects design in general. But I just wanted to move a little bit to slightly to a more applied aspect of design thinking or human-centered design and its potential limitations when it comes to different disciplines adopting design thinking. Dr. Clara Watkins, from your experience, how did human-centered design research force us to unlearn what we know about sustainable development and humanitarian interventions, specifically in product design? And also, if we can talk a little bit about co-creation, as a core element of human-centered design, talking back to resistance and, the medical field or the medical sector, how resistant was it to adopting such, tools? From your experience within the medical field and design and this overlap.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. So just to give you some background. So Dr. Anzar actually touched on it. So my PhD question sort of looked at the fact that design for development was failing. People coming from the West, going in and trying to make radical changes, and it was often a complete flop. And we've developed these new methodologies. And we were talking about human-centered design and design thinking. Was this actually going to have the impact that we were saying it was having? And it was a really interesting space to be in, because the medical sector aren't familiar with the term design thinking. That's not something that they'd heard of. They weren't familiar with human-centered design. In fact, they didn't really have a clue what design was. They knew they got products, but they didn't know like the design process or anything to do with that. What I did find is really interesting, because I think with the medical sector, we put people on a bit of a hierarchy. We see these medics up the top, and I was a little bit daunted when I went in and started working with these people, thinking, oh, but they know so much, like what am I going to do? And actually I achieved, there was no resistance, and the beauty of the design thinking process is the first stage is about inspiration and discovery, and like watching, observing, empathizing. And one of my key findings was that I realized that medical sector, they really wanted to be involved in the design process, and they were really interested and engaged with usability of products, systems, services. They wanted things to be better. They wanted increased utility. And at some of my early trips out to Zambia, I realized that they were innovators. Like a lot of them were innovating in their own right every day. They were facing wicked problems, like huge challenges. Some of them could be dying in front of them, and they had to innovate. And from watching them adapt and respond, I learned a lot, and I realized that actually they were quite open-minded. So that was a really nice part of the design thinking process, that I was able to observe them, see what they were doing. I mean, things like going to DIY stores and buying drills to go do surgery, and I'm sort of watching, thinking, this is incredible. You'd be amazed what they did with zip ties, drills, and bed sheets. But that's what they were doing. And when I said I wanted to design better products and would they be part of it, they really wanted to be part of that story, and they wanted to be engaged. So I think when we talk about needing to be user-centric or human-centered, that actually ultimately the reason that we should do that is because the users do care. They want to be part of the process. If they're going to be the ones using the product, they do want to be involved in designing it and giving you the feedback. So yeah, I didn't have much resistance. If I'm honest, I got so much feedback, so many opinions, thoughts, suggestions. It was quite overwhelming. So that was probably the bigger challenge. So I worked with a mixture of people from medical sector, from across the globe. And I had various different experiences with that. When it comes to sort of the question regarding human-centered design and like what we were looking at with regards to sustainable development and humanitarian intervention, I think it's quite an interesting one, isn't it? I think what human-centered design has done is made us take a step back and think about what we do as designers and why we do it. And I think product design specifically had the sort of title of mass consumption, mass production. You know, when you look at undergraduate degrees, you're talking about really nice renders, it's like you're getting your pro markers out, doing some really jazzy pictures. And I think we see that a lot on Instagram. We see a lot of really nice keyshot renders going on, but actually human-centered design makes you look more holistically about design and the impact of design. And when we talk about humanitarian design, it's recognizing that we could do a little bit more. And I think if you look at the process there, it made us and allowed us to look at how we could put design and the social sciences together. And it actually engaged people more actively in that process. So I think that was it has been quite revolutionary. It's not new. It's been talked about for a long time, and people have been writing about how important the social sciences is to design for a long time. Human-centered design just gave it some sort of framework and a bit of a toolkit, and I think that's where it's been really powerful. And I've completely forgotten what the other question was.
So yeah, I asked about co-creation and how it is a major part of human-centered design, I asked about resistance. So, like you said, there's this hierarchy and, medical, something that Dr. Anzar touched on, medical professionals saying like, how is a user going to participate in this process? But I'm gonna, add a part to this question that how can the designer balance their knowledge and expertise and the limitation of available resources, because that's a major part, especially in your area, and the user's input. So where does the designer's expertise stop and the user's input start, and where is the overlap, and how do we make sure that how does the designer remain ethical with regards to their own biases, in a sense?
That's a really good question. So co-creation has its own challenges, and if you look at the methodologies, it's about putting it at the early stages, like getting it in the early stages through the ideation to come up with the better solutions. And then we've got the user testing and evaluation, and you do sort of what evaluation techniques we put in place, I think, is key to the success, because everyone's got their own opinions, their own thoughts and suggestions for where something should go, and you can end up going quite broad, and it can be I did end up in points where it's a never-ending cycle of iterations, and you show a new person and they've got another thought, another suggestion. And actually I think it's about self-restraint, but also having a successful design team and putting credit on the designers as well. So you do have to sort of balance it. I think the beauty of putting the user at the center is that we do take our own perceptions out of it in the early stages, but at the end of the day you have to say, what is the designer's skill set, and go back to the design process itself and say, all right, now we've got to do our design for manufacturing. What is the feasibility and viability factors of this product, and how we're going to take it forward? I don't think there's an easy answer to that, and it definitely matters the context within which you're working. If you're doing co-creation in a different environment, so I've done a lot of studies where you're doing it in context, a context that isn't my own. So you may have time limitations anyway, so that creates a quite definitive stop. But there's a lot of arguments that that's not a good approach either. So I don't think there's other people have probably got quite big opinions on this as well. So this is quite a big topic in its own right.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you're right. This is a question it's a big debate, and I'd like to hear any of our speakers' opinion on this matter as well. I just want to remind our audience that you can ask a question anytime in the chat box, and we will get to the questions towards the end of the webinar and the Q&A session. To stay within this community intervention area, I think I would like to ask Mariana Santos, welcome with us on the webinar, Mariana, she just joined us. Yeah, I'd like to ask you a question from your experience in this area. So stories are a foundational element of how people perceive themselves and their cultures, yet sometimes it can seem like an abstract, maybe aspect within human-centered design or design thinking. What are some experiences that you can share with us and that can tangibly express the power of storytelling and design thinking in supporting community interventions? And I have another fold to my question. How important is design thinking at integrating different perspectives about volatile social justice issues, you know, especially in media and journalism, which is your main domain?
Hello, thank you so much. I'm sorry that I'm just joining now. It's I was running meetings. This is a Zoom live right now.
Thank you so much.
Happy. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Professor Nael, for the invitation. Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you, especially with Angeliki, that we were colleagues at Stanford together with Professor Nael. So it's so special to be here talking about design thinking, which is the core of my life, of my professional application. So I am a designer, a communication designer. And I was just chatting with my colleague who is a designer as well, telling her I'm going to talk about design thinking in this conference in Lebanon. And we were talking about design thinking. And as designers, for designers who study design, design thinking is just doing design. It's the natural process that you think about what is the problem. Then you go after potential solutions, you'll get inspired. Then you focus more, what is the real problem you want to focus. And then so this is actually just a design practice that I think became more mainstream when other areas of industry became aware of that and start using it to its own power, bringing all different perspectives together. Where I work, the name of the organization is called Chicas Poderosas. That means powerful women, powerful chicks. And it started as a workshop for women journalists in Latin America to learn about technology. And then when we start doing these workshops, we start understanding that the problems actually is not just about technology. It was just about the lack of self-leadership that women in Latin America had because of cultural norms, because of societal rules. So bringing these stories that you were asking me about became like the main flagship of Chicas Poderosas. We want to shine lights where these stories are underrepresented. And by doing that, I can tell you a recent story. So we have 17 countries in Latin America, Portugal, Spain, and US. And in every chapter, we have trained 2 leaders per country. So we work in teams of duos because the community needs to have a fire, and then we have 2 leaders per country to hold the fire. And then they build their own teams, and then they start doing their own prototypes. And everything at Chicas we do, it's using design thinking. First of all, because we are telling stories, we reach out to our audience. What are the needs? We do lots of surveys, interviewing and communicating, trying to create this tissue of community a little bit stronger so we can work within the community out. So our design process is getting the knowledge from the community and then assemble these leaders per country and then give them the tools, and then they form their teams. And then one motto is fail fast, succeed soon. The no fear of failure. It's extremely important, especially in this culture in Latin America, where we are not afraid of failing, because before, if we fail, we may lose an opportunity in our lives. Right now it's like, come here and learn how to fail gracefully and learn from your mistakes. So the girls in Argentina, they got together and they said, let's do a study, a cross-border study, well, across the entire Argentina, 24 states, and let's have one representative from each state, that it's a woman, a non-binary person, or an LGBT person from the LGBT community. So we get the view of all people that relates to feminine somehow. And we want to see the access to sexual reproductive rights during COVID times. And throughout these times, most clinics were closed, access to hormones and stuff like that were non-accessible. And through this story, we have had one journalist from one of these federations who was a trans woman that did not have access to hormones. And throughout publishing this story, the clinic called her and said, look, I'm so sorry you didn't get it. Let's come here, let's fix this. So there was a lacking on the system. And by putting this story on the public lights, it was meant to become important, and then it was given its own attention. And this is one big story. And then another one is a couple of years ago, we were doing in Argentina as well, one trending topic, which was about the importance of having clothes for all sizes of women. And they ran a hashtag saying, my body is not the problem. Like, please, Argentina, have a rule that you can have small clothes and big clothes. And it became trending topic. And a few weeks later, it became a law in the country that they have to have multiple sizes. So these kind of stories reflect how we can change a little bit, even society and policies, if we get together and if we know very well what is the problem we want to define and we want to solve. And in Latin America, the common problem of lack of access to human rights, it's so strong and so visible that lots of ideas come from different sides of the world. So at Chicas Poderosas, we provide this echo chamber for people to try out their projects. Then we connect with this knowledge from, different business models to make, non-for-profits sustainable. And then we are working with these women leaders in all countries, aiming for them to use design thinking to build their communities together, to build solutions for their realities. So that's how we're doing. And then you said as well, how important is design thinking to the implementation of different
yes. To integrate different perspectives about social justice issues like the ones
yes. So for instance, right now we are working with indigenous communities, and I'm working from Portugal since 2 years, like last year COVID, I got stuck in my country. My community and my team is working in Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. And for instance, now we're going to work to represent the realities that are underrepresented of indigenous communities in vulnerable situations. How can I, Portuguese person in South of Europe, do some work for indigenous communities in Central America? So that's how important the diversity of perspectives, the diversity of collaborative working, and the importance of finding as well a base ground for all this diversity to cooperate and coexist, and not having these issues of I'm the professor, you are the student. Here, like, everybody has something to bring to the table. And what is more important is that we are all looking towards the same goal, like solving the same issue. And in the Chicas Poderosas community and in this storytelling for human rights, it has played a huge role, because, there's so many other realities and diversities that even if we try to, to represent as well as we can, it's impossible if we don't include their voices. So that's all. That's why in our work, we really believe that all voices should be heard. So this is the core of why we exist. So to be heard, to be collaborating, and to not fear the differences. We are trying to celebrate the differences.
Yeah, and I think design thinking in its essence celebrates these different perspectives and converges all these points of view. It's a great, these are great examples to draw the parallels between, issues like social justice issues or more humanitarian stories or issues or wicked problems, and also the core aspects of design thinking. I'm going to switch a little bit the topic and talk about more about innovation. When we talk about design thinking, we directly think of innovation, innovative solutions to the wicked problems, but also disruptive innovation. And I think space exploration falls clearly within this category. Angeliki, thank you for joining us. And I wanted to hear a bit about your experience. Can you explain to us how is design thinking implemented in the space exploration sector? And also how is it integral to the establishment of multinational communities that focus on, for example, lunar exploration, and particularly regarding making lunar settlements a reality?
Hello, everyone. Likewise, I'm very excited to be here and reconnect even virtually with some old friends and classmates. It's super exciting to see how everybody is reapplying these design tools in different sectors and with different cultures. I think design is undergoing a huge transformation phase. Like imagine like a couple of decades ago, it was all about aesthetics and like architecture thinking. And now it's really a strategic thinking tool used by CEOs and like top multinational companies like Apple and Google, and even space agencies like NASA and the European Space Agency. And I think for me personally, the methodology is so beautiful because it tells you are never stuck, and you can always find a creative way to reframe a challenge and like work around your problem. And like this is like something that really is at the heart of like how like, you know, space exploration works, because we are constantly pushing the boundaries of what is possible. We try to push technology out of the current state of the art. And like, believe me, like when we are designing space missions, it's like really a creative process. Like the spacecrafts we send to other planets are usually the product of a decade of work between 10 of thousands of humans, between of so many different disciplines. So it's like the definition of a radical collaboration. And I would say that usually, like in the space sector, we have these two parallel challenges. Like the one is about designing the engineering artifact, like the spacecraft that we send to space, and all the technical and scientific elements and payloads around that. But the other, let's say, design challenge that is a little bit underestimated from the people outside the space world is like how difficult is to design, let's say, the system intervention that brings these space missions to life, and they get them accepted and funded by either the US Congress or, you know, like the European ministers. Because, like, believe me, especially for politicians, when we are talking about space agencies that are accountable to taxpayers and they need to generate socioeconomic benefits, sometimes like fundamental science and exploration is considered like you know, like a luxury. So we really need to use tools like storytelling and like deep empathy and need finding work to align the actual mission objectives with like the industrial needs of a country, or with like the political ambition of like some politicians. So it's super complex. And I would say my experience is with like two kind of like, let's say, different applications. The one is very specific to early space mission concept formulation, like this very early phase of like the spacecraft design. And the other is like with the more strategic planning for international missions. And personally, I was first introduced when I was working at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the Innovation Foundry, where it's basically the engine when they formulate new space missions ideas. And like traditionally, like this life cycle, it used to include only systems engineers. But the last almost a decade now, JPL has a very institutionalized process where they have like a small team that comes before this systems and concurrent engineering process, they call it, where they basically bring a team of diverse experts, and they include also designers, storytellers, communicators, and even like visual artists. And they really try to think about the why we do this mission, and like how we justify the value of this science to the public from the very beginning, and not like at the end as an afterthought. And at the same time, they have incorporated many of the traditional design conceptual tools. So for example, like how do we ask better questions, and how do we like understand the world around us, and like what science questions we want to ask, and how basically it's all about, you know, like having deep empathy and like understanding the world around you. Or you know, like how we try to push for like very wild innovative concepts. Like we use like very structured brainstorming methodologies, or like selection, and all the, you know, the traditional like design thinking brainstorming tools. And then also the actual prototyping phase, because you might say, okay, but you know, how do you actually do that with a space system? But well, like, you know, like we have boxes with like Legos and like Play-Doh, and many of the crazy concepts you have seen that JPL is doing. Like, for example, like the NASA Perseverance Mars rover that just landed on Mars. It has like the first helicopter that will fly on a planetary body, and like that was part of this process to help push for like wild ideas and like get out of this traditional systems engineering mindset. So that is like, let's say, the experience with the engineering, systems engineering process, and like how we still, I would say, some of these like more creative tools. The other is more about like systems intervention and like systems design, because like last year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the first human landing. And like, you know, this historic achievement has generated like unprecedented innovations and spin-offs that like we're still using even now. Like even your iPhone chips might have been generated through Apollo. But the thing is that right now we have a new era of exploration where it's not only one country like the US, but it's basically a whole new array of private actors, commercial actors, emerging small nations, and like all these different stakeholders. They have so many, you know, divergent motivations and interests and objectives of what they want to do to the moon. But we believe that, let's say, in order to have like a more sustainable and long-term exploration, is better if we try to coordinate everyone around like an integrated and like mutually reinforcing strategy. So like there is among agencies, they say for right now, to try and create like an international partnership among all the different players, which is very difficult. You know, like we have the International Space Station, but like right now we are really at the beginning, like putting something in place for the next phase for the moon. So sorry, I think I talked too much, so I will keep it short here and let somebody else speak, but it's amazing to be here.
No, thank you so much. This is an amazing topic. And as you mentioned, like very, you know, just a few days ago, something huge happened in terms of space exploration. So it's amazing that you were here to talk to us about, you know, different things. And I find it very interesting that you use the same tools that maybe we use in classes to ideate for smaller problems nonetheless, you know, like Play-Doh and these Lego and prototyping, that you use this as well, you know, in space exploration. That's very interesting to hear.
Totally transferable, and
yeah. Exactly.
It's all about, for me, like design is all about like growth mindset. So like this, like try to reframe every challenge and find the solution no matter the constraints you have in front of you. And this can be everywhere.
Yeah, and we see, it's interesting that we see a lot of people already doing this, but there wasn't a name to it. There wasn't a name assigned to it, like design thinking or human-centered design. But when you look at it in retrospect, it makes so much sense that anyone in any industry can adopt it. Thank you so much, Angeliki, for this what you just told us about your experience. My next question is in part referring to commercial design and products in particular. And it's something that Dr. Anzar touched on briefly in one of his answers. There is this obsession with big data today. However, and the patterns and the trends that big data shows. But some vital human insights tend to be overlooked due to the myopic reliance on only quantitative methods and data. How aware are organizations of that, and how are they mitigating these risks? I would like to start with Bethan, maybe from your experience with user testing and simulation, but also Mariana, if you have from your experience any insight on that, and also Dr. Clara.
It's a really interesting question, actually, because data is very informative, but data on its own doesn't tell you. It tells you that there may be trends, or there may be something that needs to be further investigated, but it doesn't tell you the human element, like why, what was the what behavior led to that spike or change in that data. So data on its own can be actually quite dangerous. And I find that in my role, I become the keeper of data. And what I mean by that is that quite often I ask staff to generate, to go and actually generate systems that generate data, because we need to be informed and make informed decision making. And then quite often when you've generated data, data alone is very dangerous because it can be misused, or it can be used in the wrong context. So then I find myself the keeper of data. So I'm saying, okay, when we generate this data, we need the human element now that sits alongside this. So how can we actually bring the human intervention into it? And you have to be very clear with your rules of engagement, because otherwise participants or anybody else who that data, their data is being held, are quite defensive about what are you going to do with this data. So you have to be quite collegiate. So I really am a fundamental believer that actually, going back to what Clara said, the social sciences, the quantitative, the qualitative, the mixed method approach is really key to human-centered design and to design thinking. There is no one that actually outsits the other one or is better than the other. And I forgot there was another part of your question, and I've forgotten what it was now. Or something else.
I asked about how we see this in a lot of corporate organizations, that there's this obsession with big data. There's a lot of focus on it. So how are organizations aware of this? I mean, as a designer yourself, you are clearly, you're clear about the importance of the mixed methods, but are organizations aware of this myopic, reliance on big data? And how, if they are, how are they mitigating these risks?
Again, I think it goes down to that, you're right, I am a designer, therefore I am empathetic with what needs to happen with that data. And then when you can influence an organization, this is, but I'm still talking, you're absolutely right, quite a local level. Yes, so then our organization becomes quite empathetic of it. It's a difficult one to balance, because if you think in higher education, there is so much data that we are measured against in quite relative and absolute terms. And so from a product design, a human-centered design perspective, the data is another form of research that feeds into the bigger picture, but it can never be done in isolation or on its own, because you need the human intervention. So maybe I'll let somebody else kind of step in and answer the next bit that potentially I'm struggling with, because it isn't an easy one to answer.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, Dr. Anzar, if you have, from your experience, if you have any input on this.
Yeah, can you reframe the question a bit so that I know which part of the question am I talking about?
Yes, we're talking about big data and how much insight it gives. Obviously, it shows trends and the patterns that organizations can rely on to start the design process, but also this quantitative data can be, a lot of human insights that are very important to human-centered design and design thinking can be overlooked if we only look at this big data and the trends that it shows. So how are organizations aware of this, and how do they mitigate these risks of using this big data in a wrong way, or misusing it, like Bethan just mentioned?
Yeah, multiple aspects of that. And I think that so because the field is still pretty new and different dimensions of data are being captured in different contexts, and the ethics and the privacy and other things around that are also pretty shady in different parts of the world. But what has truly happened is that that industries have tried to understand the data that's coming to them, the quantitative whatever factors they like to consider as a part of the algorithm that tries to give them some sense out of it. But without giving it, without seeing the data from a qualitative lens, most of the interventions are bound to fail. I'll give you an example here from Pakistan. So they were inspired through this application WeChat that started in China as a single platform to do everything in the chat application. And so one of the telecom industries here got inspired and they said, super, the data shows specifically from data that people really love to be in a single platform and get things done. And without doing a comprehensive study or any study, I think, of the users here, they had this massive investment on creating this single application platform that no one used, and it died within, I think, a couple of months of its start. Another thing happened, data was suggesting that in the agricultural field, people who are growing food and the food has to go through multiple hands before it reaches the users. So they came up with a pretty simple business plan, a really big conglomerate in Pakistan, that if we remove the middle person and we become the direct connection between the farmer and the people, sounds like an amazing idea. Data suggests that people will get cheaper access to food and resources, the farmers will get more money, and we will also make good profit. Again, completely forgetting the whole transportation of experiences and food and everything, and just based on data started implementing this, a disaster of an experience, and nothing came out of it. And these are typical examples of disconnected people understanding data. And so in many ways, data is extremely helpful as well, and you can't discount that. And I think it's critical as well for us to imagine these experiences. For example, in terms of sustainability, a basic instrument in the house, the use of microwave oven. Not a lot of people know how to use microwave ovens properly. So they will just fix it on 1000 watt, click 5-10 seconds, run in and take it out, without knowing, and without even knowing why a million functions are built into a microwave oven, right? Because that's how it is. But if the data is there and the microwave oven can inform you that, listen, you're putting in something here, here's a better setting that's safer for energy, we can do it for you. And that's why a lot of companies try to put in these smart systems in the machines that can learn user behavior and over time inform the user about the best use. But again, these come in with questions of privacy. But that's a separate question. I'm not talking about privacy here. What I'm saying is that it's really important to understand the importance of data. I am from STEM myself. I know that data is critical, but data without context is absolute disaster. So you cannot discount that. And anyone, and again, qualitative arguments alone without having any insights into the quantitative part of it is also a disaster. So you talk to 5 people and you come out claiming that you understand everything about the world is also extremely fallacious, which, by the way, sounds absurd, but happens a lot.
That's true. Mariana, I was wondering if from, part of your experience is data visualizations within journalism. So maybe, I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about this aspect, big data,
Totally.
how, how people are looking a lot at it now, but how much it hides from, the human side.
So there's like 2 sides story of the data. One is with the stories that we create, what is the data about the impact that we create actually, and the impact of our programs. So this is data that we are obsessed. So from now on, everything we do have M&E measure of impact, like everything we put, what's the goal? What is the ending goal? We want to define the solution, or we want to address this, and then we measure ourselves against our own KPIs. And then another thing is to use data and storytelling inside the data. Well, inside the storytelling, we have data that can make a concept that can be some kind of difficult so much more accessible and obvious, and kind of like factual in your face. There is not an opinion. This is a fact, and this is the context, and this is why we are doing this campaign, or we are doing this story. So yeah, it plays a definite role. And more journalists are learning how to use data to tell better stories, how to cross databases and realize new trends. So this is becoming a journalistic practice as well. So yeah, but I would like to reiterate the importance of context, because when it's out of context, it loses its meaning for everything we do.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Dr. Clara, I was wondering if that's a big element of your field, or it's not really because you're, because of the hands-on nature of medical interventions.
Yeah, it's fascinating listening to this. I'm currently in the middle of teaching a research methods module to our MSc students, and the way we deliver it is, this is qualitative data, this is quantitative data, these are mixed methods, and we're doing a live project which is off the back of a knowledge transfer partnership we're doing with a construction company who would rely on big data. And it's been fascinating to watch the students' perception of it and what they should do, and then them tackle the company so there's a gatekeeper in their way to get the required information. So it's been quite an interesting journey to see them approach it from their perspective as sort of more new to the sort of high level research methods, and they're like, but it's obvious it has to be mixed method. We need the qualitative and we need the quantitatives, and we need them to give it to us. I know construction industry, it's new, but what we found is that when they hear the qualitative data, they're fascinated by it because it's new. So it's new insights, and I think it has the power to sort of win people over quite nicely. If you get a really good bit of qualitative data, people feel there's big insights from it. So I found that it's been quite an interesting one from the students' perspective. With regards to my own research, I do mixed methods, but a lot of mine's to do with hands-on user testing, evaluation, very traditional design thinking, so slightly different there.
Yeah, thank you, Clara. I think it's the story element within qualitative data that is really that captures people or designers when they're working with people. I have a question that I can't not ask, and it's COVID related, of course. What has COVID, the COVID pandemic crisis made clear about the importance of design thinking, and how do we adapt our understanding of systems design in relation to future possibilities of similar global health, crises like this one? I'd like to start with, Angeliki, if you'd like to share your point of view on that, and then we'll move to maybe Clara and Mariana as well.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, pandemics convey there's something that can only be solved with international cooperation and systems thinking. From the European Space Agency perspective, we actually are looking at how satellite data can contribute to measure some of the impacts of the coronavirus lockdown and monitor also the post-recovery process. So for example, during the first phase of the extreme lockdowns, we observed a really dramatic reduction in air pollution, for example. And when the pandemic lockdown starting easing across China, we saw again, the nitrogen dioxide levels skyrocketing again. Or now, for example, we have another partnership with the European Commission, and we use satellite data to actually characterize shipping vessel routes and dynamics, because the pandemic has actually impacted a lot of the logistics and all the shipping traffic, because some of the airlines are not flying. So again, this has a systems effect on air and water quality. Maybe the air quality is improving, but water quality is not. So there we actually have, together with the European Commission, a website. I can set the link if you want to
yes, please.
visit it. And every almost a month, we open a new challenge where the public can look into new satellite data sets and find different applications for the post-COVID recovery, or the different impacts we see around our cities or in a more worldwide level.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angeliki. Yeah, I think this is very insightful in terms of witnessing such a pandemic that we were going through, and the technology that we have to be able to deal with it, but also monitor it as it happens. Mariana, I was wondering, from your experience with community intervention, obviously a lot of your work had to be slowed down or maybe affected by what's happening. So, how does design thinking help in that? And what did we learn about design thinking in this context?
Actually, with COVID, it really reinforced the disparity among communities, and especially those in more vulnerable situations. So we start receiving more asks to help report these underrepresented stories that during COVID suffered the most, like access to human rights, to access to sexual reproductive rights, access to economics help for women in Brazil. Then doctors were seen as something evil, and women have been attacked in Mexico, the frontline doctors. So it has affected mostly women and non-binary people. So has been a lot more stories to be told, and more financing specific for COVID that we were able to grant this year to work with these communities locally to run stories on the realities. So design thinking, once again, is bringing us together to think about solutions, to rethink about the systems that are in place, and to propose new solutions. So I think COVID as well brought us more together, the community. More people are working remotely, like it became a normalized, and we are working with indigenous community leaders in Colombia, organizing an event in the Andean region, and preparing to work together with these indigenous communities in their own language. So COVID brought us together. At the same time, there has been a lot of suffering, so a lot more stories to be told. So yeah, design thinking is helping us connect the dots, connect the hands to help in this very tough situation.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Sorry, my camera is off because of the internet. I have one last question before we move to the Q&A. And I want to hear all of your opinions regarding this question. From our teaching experience and seeing things with students, many students are genuinely intrigued and very passionate about human-centered design and design thinking. It makes so much sense to them, but their backgrounds tend to focus more on the tools and elements of design thinking instead of the holistic understanding of the process, especially in Lebanon, where we do not have a design program per se that teaches the whole process, or industrial design or product design in any of our academic institutions. So what advice would you offer students on their human-centered design or design thinking journey in relation to their roles or their potential roles as designers? I want to start with Clara and then move, and hear from all of you on this one.
Thank you. Do you know, that's a really big question. And I think obviously it depends what year group you're looking at, but one thing I say to all of our students, and I start it from open day, from the first minute they come to us, that to be a good designer, you have to go outside, you have to immerse in the world, you have to empathize, you have to open your eyes and just look around. I spend a lot of time encouraging them to go and do things. I spend more time encouraging them to do like outside world things than I do getting them to sketch. Because if you don't immerse in the world around you, it's really hard to design because you don't know what's going on. So I think that's the best piece of advice I could offer, is get outside of your bedroom, get outside of your house, and just be part of life. Look at what people are doing, and also other people's lives. So look at where you sit in your social class, and go out, immerse with other people, and do other things, make friendships, talk to random people. That's safely talk to people. Yes, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I think a lot of the students who are not designers, they have this fear, the first statement is I'm not a creative or I'm not a designer, but I think this is like a muscle, observing and looking at people and talking to people is just like you're training a muscle that you develop with time. Bethan, what?
So I would say my advice would be to actually understand the holistic process and all of it, but actually understand where your strengths are in it, because you'll never do it in isolation. You will work collaboratively. And I think to understand what you bring to a team as an interdisciplinary, as a designer, as an engineer, as a journalist, as all these different attributes, actually then you'll feel confident in the role that you play. And I think that, just like Clara said, you know, when you run out of ideas, that's because you've not been inspired enough. So when you get that moment on a sheet of paper and there are no more ideas coming from your head, it's because you're only exploring a certain amount of worldly experiences and a certain bubble that you're in. And actually, you've got to go and actually, I call it, bash your mind apart and look beyond the boundaries of what you're used to in order to inspire and generate lots of ideas. And the other, I think I'll finish on two things. Don't predetermine the outcome. I think we find confidence in knowing where it's going and what the answer is, and you have to let go of that. And actually, design thinking is the enabler that allows you to let go of knowing what the answer is going to be. And I think if you think you know what the answer is going to be, you've constrained it straight away. And actually, you've said all the other ideas are actually not as good as the one I have. So you've got to let go of that. And then the last thing I'd say is that we all have assumptions and we all bring a bit of us to the process. But actually, the key thing about design thinking is now challenging your assumptions. So put your assumptions on paper, but actually, now let's challenge those assumptions. Were they right? Were they wrong? And how do we do that? Well, that's watching, that's observation, that's inspiration, that's data, that's how other people have done it, and that's pooling it into a melting pot and challenging your assumptions. There we go. Is Dana frozen?
Yeah, she froze. So I would like also to hear from you.
Sorry.
Angeliki, if you can go ahead and share with us.
Sorry, I didn't hear my name. Yeah, like advice for students, like so many different things that come to mind. Of course, like design thinking. Design is a muscle that you need to just practice, and like you need to develop your own, let's say, design taste. Like I think it's also all about trusting your intuition and like hands, and like you know, it's not about what the group is thinking. Like sometimes you really need to go with your hands and like develop this gut feeling. The other advice is like, yeah, like the usual, kill your babies. Like you need to be able to kill very fast even your favorite ideas. Again, you know, what also Bethan said about dealing with your bias that you bring into the process. But the other thing that is very important that I want to mention is that also I feel like design is really all about like serving the communities you are designing for, and like especially we need to think how we bring into the process like vulnerable or marginalized communities. Like Mariana, for example, he's been doing that so amazing in like Latin America, and like including all these women that have never had the opportunity to be heard or like be in a leadership position. But also another point is probably that that's more from the space systems engineering perspective, is that when you design such a very complex and adaptive system, you are not strictly, you are not the only designer. Like we can just hint the system towards one direction, but you know, we're just participants in this process. Like there can always be unexpected things that will surprise us, like unintended consequences. When we design, for example, for a specific user, like what happens to the other users in this ecosystem. And like, so like, I think, yeah, it's very important to think, you know, when we design a system, like what are all the other systems that is interfacing with. So yeah, like, and as a final thing, even if there is no, you know, a design course in your country, there are now so many online courses and tools that you can just, you know, like get started.
Yes, thank you so much, Angeliki. Dr. Anzar?
Yes, Dana, if you don't mind, I want to share a few images of some student work that would give you insights in what students can actually end up doing.
Of course.
Right, I'll try sharing my screen. This new processor failed at doing that quite often. Just let me know if you see the
Yes,
screen.
we see it. Yes, we see it.
All right, fantastic. So on the same point, students usually do get confused about where to start, and if I'm from, let's say, an engineering major or a business major, how do I become a design thinker? And see, it's a designer's mindset that's very important. And here's an example of some of the things that we did. We only asked our students from the very onset, asked them to go and experience the city, something like Clara was referring to, that you go and experience as well. So they went into the field and they realized, women especially remarked that mobility in the city is extremely tough for them. The city is not designed for them to walk or to move without being extremely uncomfortable and unsafe in the spaces, which triggered a project that a lot of women from different programs, engineering, computer science, development policy, and design were working on. And this is now in its second year, the project called Her City, Her Stories, in which they started without knowing what tools to use, but the more they understood the problem, the more they started getting attracted toward another field called design futures. So if there is an alternate, or if they want to design future for the city of Karachi, what is it that they can do? How can they map it differently? And different products were coming out, including interesting designs, including important understanding. So it really doesn't matter what your background is if you get deeper into the problem. And we did the same with our engineering students who were confused about design thinking and electrical engineering. What's the connection? And we put them on the roads and we asked them to experience the city. And they came out realizing that, again, mobility in a city like Karachi was extremely tough, and they figured out different parts of the roads were completely broken, primarily because of water leakage in the city, and there was no way to figure out that. So they ended up coming up with solutions around that. And then the same thing happened. They went to a hospital, collaborated with that, and figured out that there were some health needs. So instead of buying expensive equipment, they were able to augment the existing equipment with smaller add-ons, the Internet of Things. So the skill set varied. And so the point is everyone figured out that the problem that they're engaging within the varied skill set, what are different solutions that they can come up with, which included working on solutions like the ones that I'm talking about. And another problem that they faced was that we don't have a good relationship with the city itself. And so they started exploring some parts of the town. This is a picture from one of the religious places that Hindus have in the city of Karachi. Not a lot of people know that they have those places, and they started mapping those experiences. So it's a large variety of things that can happen. I'll just stop sharing. There's a large variety of things that can happen if you just immerse yourself into the city, into the experiences. And every single experience will bring something interesting for you. It will bring an opportunity for you to engage with that. And it's not about sketching. It's not about your ability to create aesthetic stuff. So design is really about problem solving as well. So your ability to understand and solve problems. And I think every discipline is very well connected within that. You all have problems that you need to solve. And if you develop this designer's mindset, you would be in a wonderful position to have a larger impact on the work that's happening.
I think we can hear also from Marianne.
All right, so I would say bring your full self and trust the journey. I think for me, trusting the journey has been the biggest lesson, because as a control freak that I am, I always want to control, but you would be surprised with the amazing things that happens when you give up control and let magic happens. So yeah, I would say that.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Thank you everyone for your input. I'd like to.
So we will go now to the Q&A questions from the audience. First, thank you all for your valid inputs. Like, everybody is so much enjoying this talk, and I think now everybody is on NASA, so we're seeing what COVID is happening. So Angeliki made like a huge now trend in our chat. So the first question that came was to Bethan, and you were speaking about your kids and implementing design thinking. Some people are really interested to see how could you implement design thinking methods at this young age? Like, how could you apply these rules and start allowing them to get used to these methods?
It's a really good question. And because I do it implicitly, I've been reflecting on what is it that I'm doing. And what I've been doing is I've been looking at, if you look at the human-centered design process in a very raw format, inspiration, ideation, implementation, which we're all familiar with, actually particularly because we're schooling them at home now, so quite often when I'm working, they're asking me questions. What I say is you need to do research. And it's quite fundamental and it's quite basic, but actually what I'm doing is I'm getting them to look for ideas, and so I start with that very gently, say right now, and then I sit with them and say, okay, now you've seen those ideas, how are you going to develop your idea? Sometimes it's hard because their age, the 8-year-old is very young, and other times they start to get it very slowly. And it's that's very much personally with my children, but actually that's what we need to do. And that's what the curriculum that I've been involved with, have been supporting teachers, is actually understanding how can you set the environment that they feel safe enough to be able to explore different ideas and opportunities and bring them in then to develop their own ideas. And it's as simple as that.
This is really amazing. Like it also answers to what Dr. Clara was saying, like to get out there. So if you can implement at that age the idea of research and like getting engaged and feeling with others and being in their shoe, so like they would grow up to be natural design thinkers without actually going and learning it. So they would approach all the problems in the world like in a good way.
That's the hope, yes.
Yeah. Dr. Anzar was answering all our questions. So I'm going to ask you again so that everybody shares like your information. So from your experience, how could you highlight the importance and design thinking and its effect on the sustainable development goals?
Yeah, so I was answering that. I did not know I had to wait till the end. My apologies.
You answered all the questions.
No, just two of them, which I thought were perhaps relevant. Yeah, so see what happens, especially in the developed parts of the world, in developing parts of the world, that almost all problems that we see around ourselves are in one way or the other featuring in the Sustainable Development Goals. So for example, some of the examples I was sharing that students are working with, the working of women or inclusivity of women is, I think, the sustainability goal number 5. There's one related to water, and I talked about that as well. That what really happens is that when you stop Googling from problems to solve and you start going out and experiencing the city or the experiences of the place where you are in, your mind suddenly opens to a completely new set of problems that, because of either your privilege or other ways how we have prevented from these problems, you didn't see. And that happens to, in our case, I think it features a lot of those problems in the Sustainable Development Goals that we end up working on without actually directly trying to address those goals, but they're so integral to us at the moment that they become a part of the conversation. I think more intentional conversations are to happen in the developed part of the world, where perhaps these goals are not as important as they are in our context. And so perhaps they need to specifically focus on these problems where for us, these are magnified, but for the other part, they're not as much magnified.
Thank you so much. We have also a question to Dr. Clara. How can we encourage designers to apply more simple designs as per Le Corbusier? Form follows function, and me van der Rohe, less is more to prevent more waste, mass production, and global warming. Also, like a topic that everybody is interested in, how to do everything.
It's a really good question. So a key part of a lot of my research is to do with looking at frugal innovation and how, like you say, less is more. And that actually, so one of the key findings of my research, when we did bottom-up innovation, so when we designed with less, for people with less, we found that when we took those products back to the developed context, so Europe, and presented them, they had the same levels of functionality as some really overproduced, really expensive products. So it's a really interesting finding. We were creating, one product example is cervical collars, which we developed out of cardboard for the Zambian context, because they could be easily made, just sort of hand cut out using locally available materials. And when we brought them back to the UK, we realized that they were actually much more sustainable because they were made from cardboard as opposed to injection molded plastic, and cost a fraction of the cost, and could be, so in the UK, a collar is made from about 4 components and they're single use, like quite a high impact product, whereas cardboard would have really low impact. So the way we did that was through listening and observing. So what could we do with less? What were the resources available? It's like the typical design thinking process, you know, what can we do with what we've got? Can we like strip it back, reverse engineer, start from nothing, and then build up? And what do we have to have? And what sort of the luxury items? What we actually found was that a lot of medical products are over designed, and they become very complex and quite unnecessary. And actually, people like less quite often. Simple is often better. So yeah, I think I would strip it back, start from the basics, forget what you know.
Exactly.
Don't stop. I think a big thing we do as product designers is we look at existing products and we're like, well, this exists and we've got this technology and we've got this and this, and I've got all these injection molding bits, and you don't need it sometimes. Just strip it back.
Yeah, amazing. Mariana is leaving us, and there's a question like I don't know if we can steal like just 1 minute of your time, and somebody is interested to see like since we're talking about design thinking and dealing with different cultures, and by default you would clash with different behaviors and mentalities, and one of them is religion or other kind of behavior. So how do you think you can approach these communities and like apply the design thinking through your work?
Through different cultures. This has not been a problem. We are working mainly with Latina women, and the major concern they have is to survive, and to survive aggression and harassment, and to be able to live a normal life. So the religion does not play a big role here, because this is a surviving mode, and religion, power, other dynamics play a different role. So I saw this question, and in my community, it's not relevant in terms of creating conflict. It's an adding point to the mix of points of view and perspectives. So it has always been beneficiary rather than a conflict item.
Amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
precious time.
My honor.
Thank you so much. Dr. Gordon, as large part of discourse around tech design has usually been focused on disruption, does human design thinking necessarily lead to disruption, or would it naturally lead to incremental design?
Sorry, was that aimed at me?
Yeah, it's actually like if the whole panelists, so I would like to hear from you about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I looked at this question. I thought this was really interesting. I think if you're not careful, it will lead to just incremental design. But the reality is that all design should be making a difference. So disruptive, technology, disruptive design is a really interesting bit of terminology. And we have seen it, and it changes how we think, and it becomes quite normal eventually. Again, the iPod is the classic, isn't it, in music, etc. So I think that actually by observing and by watching, by engaging with participants, what we do as designers is we are looking for those spaces. So people can tell us what they want, but only by telling us and by watching them can we find the void in the middle. And often that bit in the middle is the disruptive bit. The next bit then is how do you get your users to understand that is actually what they were describing to you? Because if we just keep giving people what they want and what they already experience, then we just keep churning out the same stuff. And that's what we bring to it as designers, as innovators and as creatives, is we find the void. So in all the voices, all the data and all the research, we found the gaps, and that's where we go with the new system, process, service.
Amazing. Maybe we can hear also from Dr. Clara about this topic as well. Your opinion about disruption, and how is the process conceptualized by the designer? What is the designer's role in this?
So funnily, my PhD thesis starts with disruptive innovation. And I was given the topic and I had to go and find out what disruptive innovation was to start with. And the interesting thing with disruptive innovation is it quite often happens when we're not expecting it. It's not something that you can always plan for. And I think that's, you may see incremental change, or you may see big change. I guess the design thinking methodology suggests you're aiming for disruption, but you might not necessarily achieve it. And I guess it depends on the circumstances that you're in, the context, the people that you're working with. There's so many different factors there. And I think it's okay for incremental change. You know, we're not always going to, if we keep disrupting things all the time, actually, too much disruption is not always good either. So it depends on the context you're working in. I think I wouldn't, if the question is about the pressure behind, oh, how much change do I need to make through applying design thinking? I think you don't need to feel the pressure to always be radical. It can just be little as well. Little's good too. So yeah.
And the last question is from myself, because like we've been working with design thinking, so in many different fields, but always we have this problem with fighting habits and what we already know. So how can we really like separate what we know and ourselves from the whole process, and just like kill the habit or what the norms say about reaching to a certain solution? Things like, have you faced this problem in fighting habits at the playground?
Yeah, that's a natural problem. And of course, as I said, because design thinking comes with such big promises that people are skeptical. What are you saying? There's one thing solution for all human experiences. So yeah, we do face that. And I think that that what has worked for us or is working for us is making people experience this directly. So if you keep talking about the importance of this, people might not become great believers or practitioners of any of this. So one of the things, for example, what we did a couple of years ago in the summers, we did a big workshop on student-centered design. And the very first part of this workshop was very interesting. We asked the faculty members to design personas of the students that they think they engage with. And it's easy. We have a very small section size. We teach 25 students in a classroom. It's easy for them to imagine the personas. So they created personas of the students that they believe. It's one of the parts of the design thinking where you try to imagine who you're designing for. And they created the personas and then created learning experiences around those personas. And within the same day, a few hours later, we brought in the real students, and the real students were then interviewed by them, and they created the personas again. And they were shocked what they believed the students to be and what the students were. There was a world of difference. And so they ended up realizing that the personas that they created were a reflection of themselves when they were students. And they were just expanding that to the students, while the students were very different. And hence the learning experiences or what they desired was very different. So experiencing this was a shocker for the faculty, like, oops, what have I been doing? And so this small insight then brought a lot of people around in becoming a believer in this. And this is something that we have done. I think one of the things that works pretty well, if you give some rewards to faculty members to experiment, to let's say that I see a lot of design thinkers at MUBS. So let's say Dana or you can pick up any course in your university, go to that instructor and say that we just want to help, and add some carrots to it and help. And this could be any course that features a project. And if you work with them, and when the time comes for them to identify a project or work on a project, and you introduce the foundations of design thinking, the projects that come out of that course would look very different from what it has looked traditionally. And that is something we have done here. We have intentionally asked faculty members to work with designers to imagine, or to stop bringing projects from legacy and then asking the students to experience. And that has changed the behaviors a lot. I mean, there's still a lot of people who think that we are quacks and we offer things that have no value, but there are others who have experienced it and have completely fallen in love with the bigger change. And I think at that institutional level, what helps is that if the leadership believes in it, then it's also easy to get traction of these ideas, because you can't put it I mean, you're lucky that Niall is a big believer of this. So the institution itself will get a lot of support in this direction. But let's say if the provost says, what the hell are you spending money on? What is this? Start doing what has been working for centuries, then perhaps you would feel a lot more friction. And we have been lucky in the same regard that our president is a big believer and supporter of this.
And I think the playground was the best example to see the influence of these methodologies in design thinking. And actually, Bethan, I want to ask you, is there like a positive side in building habits for design thinking as a process? Like, is there a positive part to this, or we should always like put it aside while putting the whole process?
I think, as in design thinking itself being applied in everyday life, in what we do, actually, it's because it's a process that we can adapt to our needs, then it is only positive. And it's an enabler. I see design thinking as an enabler. And on it, there are various different tools that we utilize, creative tools to maximize innovation. And it's just actually, so going back to your original question as well, which was about us as designers, how our influences just don't shape it, then it goes back to what I said about our assumptions. We start with assumptions based on other people. We start with our own assumptions based on our experiences. And so long as we're willing to like challenge those assumptions, then actually only positive can come out of it, and be objective. And that's quite a skill actually, to sit back and actually let it unfold. So I think a positive thing that comes out of it is that you have to learn to be an observer, that you can't be the voice or the leading. You have to actually be watching, reflecting, and then joining dots, the dots that you hear flying around the space, or that you've seen, you know, in different outings. You have to join those dots into one pot. So it can only be positive, I think. But then I would be biased. But that, you know.
Thank you so much, and we will finish with Dr. Clara about this topic. So if the habit of one person says something, what if we're having a group of people which everybody has his own habit? How would they all put their habits beside and focus on the real core of empathy?
So I think Beth sort of hit the nail on the head. It's that as a researcher, you have to learn to be self-reflective. You have to be aware of oneself first and foremost as a researcher going into that environment, and understand your own like unconscious bias to start with. It's really important. And then observe, that ability to observe is a real key. And there's so many different observation techniques out there. I think it's about understanding the different techniques that you could apply and the appropriateness to the context. So I don't think one size fits all, and sometimes you have to adapt slightly. So I think reflection, adaptation, it's not, the thing with design thinking and HDD is it's not a linear process. It's not a do this, then do that. It's a process with flexibility. And I think that's one of the really positive things. I think you just get better at it with time as well. I think it's a skill, practice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know I disappeared from the screen a little bit for a while, but I was hearing everything. I just my video was disappeared for some reason. Thank you so much. I think we need to wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much for. I could say that on behalf of MUBS. Thank you for speakers for sharing your invaluable experience and of course your time with us. I want to thank the audience for their active participation and very interesting questions. Thank you everyone. This has been a great chat and very insightful conversation on design thinking. I just want to say thank you. Have a good day or a good evening, and hope to see you all in similar events in the future.